And welcome again into the television version of Strategies for Living. I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan, and I'm delighted that you've tuned in, joined with us today here on Strategies. Strategies for Living, well, we're all about helping us live healthier, happier, more peaceful lives in our bodies, in our minds, in our spirits, in our relationships here in the 21st century. We do that by engaging in important conversations with folks we like to call life strategists. Each and every time we do Strategies for Living, I'm not supposed to have a favorite life strategist, but Sally Hamer, welcome.
Thank you.
LSUS writing instructor. We are going to talk about that today. How many of us say, I got a book in me?
You'd be amazed.
Do you ever say that?
Well, I have several books in me.
I know. I realize that.
Many, absolutely.
So you've been teaching writing for how many years?
About 12 years at LSU.
Yeah. Well, you and I go back a long time before that. I even forget how we came together. Probably something to do with alternative medicine or alternative health of some kind.
I come from a chiropractic family.
You do come from a proud chiropractic
very
family.
Much so.
You're very adjusted.
I am.
Well adjusted.
They put my head on straight often.
Pardon the pun. So how'd you get into this writing thing? Because you teach, you write, you edit for other people, you help other people write books. We're going to talk about all of that and more today.
You know, it's like you said, do you have a story in you or don't you?
Yeah.
I'm always amazed to talk to people about my writing, and some of them go, oh, okay. Yeah. Others go, wow.
Wow. Yeah.
And you can always tell the people who love to write, who really want to express themselves. And I think that that's really where people learn things about themselves. I know I did. I know more about people because I write and study characters, but I know more about characters because I study people.
Absolutely. Now, you do a lot of adult ed at LSUS.
That's where
mostly
I am.
what you do.
Yes.
You've got a class coming up starting June the 7th for your children's children. Now,
a memoir class.
You've hooked me right there. For your children's children.
Well, I try real hard not to call it just a memoir class because people are intimidated by that word. But
I'm thinking The Bridges of Madison County.
Okay, now that's not a memoir, that's a fiction book.
Yeah, well I know, but in the book she wrote down, the whole story was they found those diaries and they got to know her in a different way than they had ever thought about knowing her.
That's right, as a real person.
As a real person.
As opposed to a mother.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's so important about writing things for your children, or your children's children, or their children, you know, into generations.
Right.
I have a copy of a memoir that was written for my 7-time great-grandfather.
Oh wow!
Who was
what a
Macintosh? Oh yeah, absolutely. Who was the Macintosh that came from Scotland? See, so I would be interested to find out where the Macmillans came.
Scotland.
And when?
Yeah, so we're probably distant cousins.
I'm sure everybody's cousins in Scotland. But my great-grandfather, 7 times great-grandfather, was John Og Macintosh. And he was born in Inverness-shire in Scotland, went to Edinburgh, the medical college at Edinburgh.
So he was doctor?
He was working towards becoming a doctor and was conscripted into the British Army in 1776.
Oh, wow.
He came with Cornwallis to handle those unruly colonists that we had over on this side of the pond. And
put us in our place.
That's right. And so I have a story, it's only 25 pages long, but I have a story that was written by his grandson, my 5th-time great-grandfather, that tells where they went, what they did. He came with Simon Kenton, who was a Daniel Boone contemporary, down the Ohio River to Kentucky, and they were at Canton Station. And some of the little girls that were there with them were captured by the Shawnee Indians.
What is this thing? It's referred to by a lot of different monikers, but writer's block.
Oh, gosh.
You know, I was sharing with you recently, I've started and stopped more books than I can imagine.
You just need a good editor.
I do need a good editor. We'll talk after the program. I was talking to a fellow on Saturday who, when he and I were introduced to each other, he's been on the radio show multiple times, but when we first were introduced to each other by phone, we were talking about, I asked him, well, what have you written? And he said, well, I've written 3 books, but they're all in my computer.
And people are not going to come knock on your door and pull them out of there.
And so I think it's a fairly common thing. Either it's in us, or like in my friend Robert's case, they're mostly written, but he won't bring them out of his computer to finish them. What is that, Sally?
It is fear. It is a level of fear that you're not going to be good enough, or it's not going to, that you're going to succeed. I find that also. And they need to come talk to you.
So it's fear of failure, fear of success, yes.
And they need to come talk to you and take care of that. Now, who do you talk to when you need to do
Well, I have a couple. I keep a couple of them busy.
But the idea of writer's block, which is what most people call it, is that it's hard to open a vein. Because that's really what you do when you write a book. You open a vein and the blood smears out onto the page because you are talking about yourself. Almost every writer, you almost have to. You can't do something you're not familiar with. So you find people within yourselves. I've never killed anyone, but I can write about a killer. I've never, I'm not a man, but I can write about men.
You can write from take a man's persona or perspective.
Yeah, my experiences. Yeah. And we are the sum of our experiences. So we all have times when we've been angry, or when we've been in grief, or we've had all of even happy. I mean, happy is a wonderful thing to put in a book.
Absolutely.
Although you need to make sure that your characters are conflicted. Conflict is the lifeblood of a story.
I was visiting.
Even a memoir.
I was visiting with William Joyce, treasure here in the Shreveport-Bossier area recently. He was on the radio program, and he's just got a book out. His newest book is Ollie's Odyssey, which he says it's been brewing for many years. But of course, he writes children and young adult literature. But he says Ollie's Odyssey was really his story. His daughter's in there, who's now deceased, his wife, who is now deceased, is in there. He's got a lot of his life story.
Yes, and it's very cathartic to do that.
Yes.
That's what I find. This
fiscal outlook for Saudi Arabia over the next 5 years by raising revenues and cutting back spending, but it also looks at how to transform the economy away from being so dependent on oil. Those are welcome objectives, and that's exactly the kind of transformation that an economy like Saudi Arabia needs.
Well, here in the newsroom studio is our economics correspondent, Andrew Walker. Just talk us through what the proposed reforms actually are, Andrew.
Well, the big objective is to end what the Deputy Crown Prince himself described as Saudi Arabia's dangerous addiction to oil. Amongst the proposals, there is the idea of selling off a shareholding in Saudi Aramco, the giant state-owned oil company. The money from that and other assets would be put into a public international investment fund, and the revenue from that would provide some sort of alternative to fund the Saudi government and the wider economy. Military sector, they want to create initially a state-owned company there, later one that would be at least partially privatised to develop the capacity to supply military hardware. They're very keen to develop the mining sector. I suppose you could call this next proposal a kind of tourism industry proposal, in that they want to envisage a massive increase in the country's capacity to receive Islamic pilgrims. Currently, the figure's something like 8 million, according to this information, and they want to increase that up to 30 million. So you're looking at potentially then another example of diversifying the economy to generate income for Saudis that's not so dependent on oil as it has been in the past.
Is this just about oil prices? Because they are quite sweeping reforms.
Oil prices, I think, are the immediate trigger for this. There's no question about that. If you look what's happened to the Saudi government finances as a result of the fall in the oil price, it really is striking. Go back to 2012. Total government revenue was equivalent to 45% of GDP, annual national income. In last year, it was 25%. At the same time, the finances have swung from a surplus of 12% of GDP to a deficit of 16% now, which is absolutely enormous. But I think there is another longer-term issue, which I haven't heard mentioned specifically, but it must be at the back of the Deputy Crown Prince's mind, which is climate change. Ultimately, I think that he must recognise that the long-term future means that demand for oil, at the very least, must be uncertain if international efforts to combat climate change really do make a difference to the way in which we fuel our transport systems.
Andrew, thank you. That was Andrew Walker. Egypt has been braced for large protests today, with several opposition parties calling for anti-government demonstrations. Thousands of soldiers and police have been deployed.
If you want to commercially publish it, then there's another set of rules, so to speak, of guidelines that you deal. But if you're just writing it for you and your family, and it doesn't have to be something, you can even give it to a lawyer and lock it up for 50 years until after you're gone.
Absolutely.
And not have you be personally involved in it when your kids read it.
So that LSUS class begins June the 7th for another 8-week run, meets weekly, is that right? For your children's children. We are visiting with Sally Hamer today. We are talking about writing. Have you got a book in you? I think I may have one or two in me. Maybe within the next few minutes, Sally can crank it out of all of us. We'll take a break. We'll come back with Sally Hamer, our life strategist today, here on Strategies for Living. Be right back.
My relationship with music started when I was about 6 years old.
What happened was I just went to the piano and I started playing For Elise by memory.
They had a career day and a musician came to the class and he did a little demonstration, played saxophone, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do the rest of my life.
Wound up being a music educator, and it's been my life for the past, I can't even count how many years. In high school, I wanted to be a professional trumpet player, and it turned out music education was really where I needed to be. And for all these years, that's where all the time and the effort has taken place.
What I get out of music, it's like an expression of the soul, and I hate to sound sappy, but it is. It's like anything that you feel, you can convey it without words.
It takes me to a place where my words don't know how to get me, if that makes any sense. When I don't know how to put my emotions into words, there's almost always a song out there that can do it for me.
Some of the things I get out of teaching personally is actually seeing students get it. One of the subjects that I really love to teach is music theory. And many of our students come to us with a love of music and the hope of studying music and either performing professionally or being music educators. To get to that end, they need to study the music theory aspect of it. What do the notes mean? What's on the page?
Being a community college, you know, people look down on the college because of that, and I think they're wrong. So the quality doesn't suffer at all. I mean, it's unreal. They expect the same thing out of you at a community college as they do at a four-year institution.
And the concepts that you learn and, you know, techniques, and you can't find it at every school.
One of the main things that we try and do here at Bossier Parish Community College with our music students is to instill a good work ethic.
One of the scariest things that I've ever had to do was get up on the stage to do my student recitals like everybody else is required to do as a major, but the instructors help you through it. I mean, they're great. You couldn't ask for a better program here.
When I leave Bossier Parish Community College, I'm gonna go get my bachelor's, and then I'm gonna go get my doctorate and hopefully teach at a college.
One of the aspects of our music program that we're always working on is recruiting quality and talented students.
And welcome back. Welcome back into the television version of Strategies for a Living. I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan. Of course, you're watching Strategies for a Living today, but you know you can listen to Strategies for a Living. We started all of this on the radio, Sally Hamer, 24 years ago. And it's hard to believe. Time flies when you're having fun. We started on News Radio 710 Keel. We're still there. Sunday mornings, 9:05 until 10. You can find Strategies for a Living, and you can also find us on Thursdays at healthylife.net out of Los Angeles. You can also, of course, find us at www.strategiesforliving.com. Do you have a book in you? Sally Hamer she teaches us all the right way to write. Is there a right way?
Sure.
Okay.
Are there rules? Absolutely. Can you break them? Absolutely.
What's the most important rule in writing?
Oh my goodness. Let me pick from one of 20 or of 200. I think just to do it, just to write, just to sit down, put your butt in the chair. In fact, there's an acronym, and I couldn't tell you what it is right now, but it's butt in chair, fingers on the keyboard. That yes,
poised and ready.
That's right. But I think that when I'm talking about rules, it's grammar. It's head hopping as opposed to staying in someone's point of view. It's the idea of setting your structure up so that it has a beginning and a middle and an end. You know, Joseph Campbell was an anthropologist in the last century. He died in the 70s or 80s, I believe.
Right.
And you can still talk to him. I see him. He was on Bill Moyer's PBS. But he found out, as doing his research, that every culture tells stories in basically the same way. Mm-hmm. Every culture, every age, every continent, every time that there's a story.
The power of myth.
That's exactly right. That's one of his books, yes. The Hero of a Thousand Faces is another one where, again, and I love Joseph Campbell. I read his stuff all the time just to kind of refresh my memory. Well, George Lucas used the hero's journey to write the Star Wars sagas, the first ones. And actually Hollywood uses the hero's journey, which Campbell came up with, almost every movie they do.
Now, one of the things that you do is edit.
Mm-hmm, I do.
And work with authors. Mm-hmm. You have about 10 clients, including our friend Laird. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Laird was a life strategist here on Strategies for Living a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about your work with Laird.
Laird came to one of my classes, one of my fiction classes actually, and said he had a book in him. And it took him about 5 years to get it ready, which is not abnormal. Mm-hmm. Laird was the head of the local Teamsters Union.
It's a book about Teamsters.
About 25 years, and he wanted to write his Teamster story is really what it was.
Stories?
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness, what stories
and he
are
is
in
a
there.
Storyteller
Yes,
extraordinaire. So he came to me when he got the book done about 5 years later, looked me up, went down to LSU and said, is she still around? And they knew where to find me. And so we have worked together for probably about the last 18 months off and on. He had a surgery in the middle of that he had something that he couldn't work. But we got his book put together. We edited it and got it to a publishable place. And now he is selling it. It is online at LairdEvans.com.
First time that he did a book signing at Barnes & Noble, they sold out of his books.
They did the second time too.
Had to come back and do a second, and he sold out the second time. Wow.
Yes. So it's fascinating. It's a story about a kid that grew up on a plantation. His dad was the manager of the Ellerby plantation back in the day, and he ended up going to Reagan's inaugural.
There's a picture in his book of he and his wife attending President Reagan's inaugural.
Yes. And it's just a fascinating history.
Do you take on? Are you interested in more clients?
Oh, I take on clients. I have a schedule. Yes, I could take someone.
How would people contact you if they're interested, Sally, in editing? If like me, I got a book in me. How do I contact you?
Probably my email is the easiest. It's Hamer. That's HAMER SE for Sarah Elizabeth at bellsouth.net. So that's HAMER SE at bellsouth.net. www.amazon.net.
What's the hardest thing in editing?
Oh gosh, convincing someone that they might not, that sentence may not be the perfect one. That they might need to include this and take away that. And I'm not trying to make it sound like I'm the expert of their story, because I work very hard to allow them to tell the story in the way they want to. But if you're going to try to publish something, if you're trying to get into this cutthroat publishing business, you have to be very careful that you do follow some of those rules we were talking about. It does need to be a story. Have a client right now who wrote a story about a very small slice of his life right after he got out of college, when his children were being born, when he was working in particular jobs. And it's a wonderful story, but it's not commercial. And again, I'm not an expert, although I do this every day.
Sure.
And have done it for years. But the idea is to make that into something that anybody would be interested in, not just his family.
Right.
And there's the difference really between a memoir and an autobiography.
The publishing world is an interesting place today. And perhaps it's never been harder to publish a book, and perhaps it's never been easier
And that
to
dichotomy
publish a book. That dichotomy is running
is really
wild
exactly.
today. When you
Yes.
look at Amazon.com and look at the number of 35-page books,
3.2 million books on Amazon right now.
many of them are just ebooks, but still some of them are printed, the printed word and ebooks. But it's never been harder to get a book published, never been easier to get a book published. What in the world do we mean by that?
5 years ago, let me say it this way. In the past 5 years, publishing has changed more than it has in the past 50. And it has changed immensely in the past 50. So now someone can write anything they want, 35 pages, 5,000 pages, whatever they want to do, and put it up onto Amazon for free or for limited amount of money. So you can put a book up with no problem whatsoever. The problem is distribution. It is to get the book out there. It is to make it so that people know that there is that book. I mean, everybody has 300-400 friends and family, so you can sell that many pretty easily.
Sure.
But getting it to a wide market, that audience that you're looking for, is very difficult.
They tell me in publishing, and of course, I've bumped up against it with the radio program and interviewing authors for years now. They tell me the magic number is 10,000. That once you get to a sales volume of 10,000, you are going to begin to get some attention.
That's correct.
That's when you get the major. It's hard. When we say it's never been harder to publish, what we're really talking about there are the major houses, the Random Houses,
The hard to get into, Big Six is what they
the
call
Big
it.
Six, yes. And those, of course, if you're in there, or you get on the Oprah Book Club, you're assured of
Yes.
instant success.
And that is probably the 1 in 10 million chance
Sure.
to get on that book club. But yes, you're right. If you do, you're set. The problem is that there are so many books out there. As I said, around 3.2 million on Amazon this week.
I'm still waiting for my call from Oprah. I interviewed, you know who Gary Zukav is?
I do know him.
I interviewed Gary Zukav on the radio show for the 25th anniversary
He's
of
amazing.
his wonderful book. And at the end of the interview, he said, wow, this was, he said, you asked great questions. And I said, tell Oprah. And he laughed, he chuckled, he said, I'm going to. So since that interview, I've been waiting. I've been waiting by the phone for Oprah to call. She hasn't called yet, but I know it's coming, Sally. I know it's coming. So I got to get that book ready for when Oprah calls.
And you do.
And I do.
And you do.
And I
You
do.
have lots of books in you.
I think I
Everybody
do.
does.
I
We
think I
all
do.
have our stories. I
Yeah.
mean, that is the way we communicate, is through stories. And having think about this. There have only been Western Europeans in the United States for about 400 years. I'm sorry, I'll get it right. So
That's not very long.
That's not very long.
In,
When you
the-
can
in
consider-
terms of
no.
the history of the world, that's
They've-
not long.
They found mummified remains of a man in a cave in Cheddar, England, and discovered 5,000 years, old, from 5,000 years ago, and discovered family members, people who were related to him,
Wow.
living in the same area. We don't have that here.
Right.
So when we talk about the stories, I mean, so many people don't bring them with them across the pond, across the Atlantic, because they don't want to remember that. They lose their language, they lose their culture, and they lose their stories. So the idea is to tell those stories so people will still have them.
Do not lose your story, whatever you do. Your story is important. For your children's children, Sally Hamer's class, it's an 8-week class, adult ed at LSU Shreveport. You can go to
CE.lsus.edu.
And that class begins June the 7th.
I teach one every semester.
Okay. For your children's children, if you've got a book in you, this is the lady you go to, Sally Hamer. Sally, thank you so much for coming and being a part of Strategies for Living. Folks, thank you. This is our last broadcast for a little while. We take a summer break and see you in September, I guess. And it has been a pleasure to be with you as always. So for Sally Hamer, I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan. Don't forget, while we're gone here from the television version, tune into the radio. Sundays, 9:05 to 10 on News Radio 710 Keel and at www.strategiesforliving.com. For Sally Hamer, I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan. We'll see you the next time we see you here on Strategies for Living.